All right, check. I uh I just drank coffee and I never drink coffee and caffeine is really hitting me right now. My wife told me I'm supposed to be drinking water to try to lower the anxiety I'm feeling right now, but my hands are like, shaking nonstop and I was trying to read at the at a local coffee spot nearby and I could not stop shaking and so I had to come home and I'm trying to chug a ton of water but Um, and it's kind of heightening this anxiety that I'm already feeling about just a lot in life. One consistent anxiety that keeps returning back is my overall fear of teaching, which is funny enough because I come from a family of teachers. My grandpa was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, my brother and sister are both teachers. Teaching is kind of in my blood. And it's kind of also what I want to do. If I am training to be a pastor, or if on the side, I'd love to teach at some point in the future as well, whether it's in a Christian high school setting or a college or a seminary. I love learning, I love studying, and eventually I think I want to be a teacher. But with that being said, I have an incredible fear of being in a position of authority in terms of content and knowledge and material. And so I have a fear of being a teacher. Funny enough, though I'm spending all my time training and studying to become a teacher in a sense. Why do I fear teaching? It's kind of a massive hurdle I'm trying to jump over. I fear teaching for a lot of reasons. When I think of what a teacher is, and what the purpose of teaching is, it's to sort of bring knowledge to other people. The problem then becomes how you come to understand that, how you come to an understanding of knowledge, and how it is that you give out that knowledge. And I think a person in authority, someone who is listened to, ought to have true things that they are saying. And I have a very high view of truth and the importance of truth for the sake of creating a better world. I think, and this is part of my philosophy, is that what is true is also most beneficial for the individual and for all of society. And so you want to maximize your understanding and belief in truth and also your distribution of truth to other people. The problem then becomes, how do you know what you believe or what you understand is actually true? Now, in some sense, there's very clear lines of what is true and what is not. So, for example, you could say these AirPods I'm holding in my hand, this is white, and this picture behind me is red, and there are only so many options in terms of color of what it can be. It's either that thing objectively or it's not. My subjective perspective of it is that this thing is white and that the picture behind me is red. And that's my view, my perspective of that thing. And I would say it happens to also match the objective world. Now, within that understanding, there isn't much leeway for other interpretation. You can call that thing some other color, but in terms of the category of color, it's red. In terms of the category of color, this is white. Now you can make other details about this said thing, that it's small, that it's useful for listening to music, and it has a microphone in it, and it charges on its own. But that's not the category I'm dealing with. The category I'm dealing with when I say this is white is the category of color, and this thing's color is in fact white. Subjectively, that's my view of it. Objectively, I would say that's what it is. Now, in other issues, however, it becomes there grows that gap between your subjective understanding of the thing and the thing as it stands in the objective world. So take this for example. Um, you can say right now I'm reading through Augustine, on Christian doctrine, which is one of his books on biblical interpretation. And I can say, Augustine says this, and then I can read to you what he says. And thus, my teaching on it, my statement of what it is true. If I say the Bible says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son," and dot dot dot, right? That statement is true. And I can have complete confidence to make that statement. I can say, the Bible says this, and it does in fact say that, if I'm quoting it directly. But once you get to saying the Bible means this, or Augustine means this, and Augustine's view on biblical interpretation is this, and this is his view that is not changing or whatnot, it becomes a little harder to maintain that relation between my subjective perspective on that thing and that thing as it objectively is. Same with biblical interpretation. You can say, this is what the text says, read the words, and then you can say, this is what the text means when it says that. And sometimes those things, what it says and what it means, aren't always going to correlate well. And sometimes the gap between there is larger than we might want to admit. And so there's two sides to this. Either on one side, you become extremely dogmatic and extremely confident, and I would even say arrogant about that gap. And you would say that gap does not exist. What it says is this, and what it most clearly and obviously means is dot, dot, dot. Then there's the other side of the spectrum where it says, look, it might say this, but there's an infinite amount of interpretation to what it might actually mean. And that's sort of the postmodern claim, whereas there's something that is objective in the world, what it says, that this thing is in the world. And then there's also what you think it means and the interpretation of that thing. And some people go too far the other way in saying that the gap between the objective world and the world of meaning are way too far divided, and it's impossible to put them together. The Bible says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and it can mean anything. Now, the problem with that is that it doesn't take into account that there's a very limited amount of interpretations that are valid. If I say, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, it cannot possibly in any way mean, by that statement, Daniel's AirPods are white. When it says God so loved the world, it does not mean Daniel's AirPods are white. It just doesn't say that. That is beyond the realm of possible interpretations. And so you would say there's a limited space of what something can be interpreted as. And so we can have a little bit of confidence there that there is not an unlimited, an infinite amount of possible interpretations to the world. There's a finite amount of interpretations that can be held. And that is incredibly, incredibly reassuring. So on one side of the spectrum, there's what I think it means is what it means. And it's way too arrogant in my opinion. And it's way too ignorant of the other possible views. Then there's the other side that says, we can't know anything. Everything is beyond complete assurance. And I would say that's also too far too. So somewhere in the middle, we have to land where we say, it says this, it can mean these different things. Now, which do we think is the most viable? And that for me is very assuring, right? When it says, for God so loved the world, here are 4 possible ways that that statement can be understood. And you list those out, and then you deal with each of those individually and say, well, this one carries some strength for these reasons, and this one carries some strength for these reasons. And this third view is the one I'm most aligned with, because I like these reasons the most. And so that ought to bring us some bit of confidence. Nevertheless, depending what subject you're going through, makes that a bit more difficult or not. So, uh, if I'm talking about one particular statement, God so loved the world, I can I can deal with what might be all the possible interpretations, all the possible valid interpretations of that statement. And you can actually search those up. You can do plenty of studying and come to a solid conclusion that I would say is totally rational and totally justified. But as you expand that subject and you try to gain the meaning and interpretation of this larger object, so let's say from God so loved the world instead to the entirety of the Gospel of John, to the entirety of the New Testament, to the entirety of the scriptures, it becomes more difficult to limit the interpretations and possible meanings, right? So a smaller object, a smaller subject, it's easier to get small, you can only have so many interpretations of meaning. The larger the object, though, the more possible interpretations you have to deal with. And so ultimately, there are some subjects that are just so massive that I feel like the task of trying to deal with each of those views would be uh, very near impossible. I'm reading this book right now that our seminarian library recommended to me, Christus Victor, and it is a historical study of the atonement. And in the book, he deals with Irenaeus and the Western and Eastern church fathers and their views on particular things, or views on the atonement. And for me, historical theology is such a massive topic that it would be impossible to exhaust it would be impossible to exhaust all the things that have been said by all important people ever. It's just so big a topic that that range of between objective world and subjective understanding of that objective world grows to a size that is massive. And so for me, if I'm going to teach on something, I would not feel confident and I would not feel like I'm doing something justice unless I could have a good grasp of all the viable interpretations on this objective thing. So with something that with an objective thing in the world that is small, I could deal with it because there's a finite amount of studying that I can actually do and I can actually discuss. As that subject grows, though, it becomes more and more difficult. And if it is that I want to be a pastor one day, that is a massive task. And even more dangerous is the fact that your interpretation, your subjective view of that objective world grows to such a large, it grows to something of immense value and an immense importance to get right. Whether these AirPods are white or not, and whether my subjective view on this objective reality is right or not, doesn't really matter all that much. I can be right about this, but who cares? What change does that make for life, for myself, or for anyone else? It doesn't really make that big of a difference whether this is actually white or whether it's some other color and I'm just blind to it, right? But when you deal with something like faith and religion and something that is of central importance to all people everywhere, and when it has to do with eternal life or the lack thereof, that you cannot get wrong. Don't step into the realm of being an objective teacher on those things unless there can be reasonable confidence in what you're saying to be true. If you're stepping into a pulpit as a teacher of God's authoritative, inspired word, you better not be holding that loosely. You better not be standing there saying, this is what God means when he says this, and be completely off base. It's just way too dangerous, especially if something that is that important and that significant to all human existence ever. And that to me is incredibly terrifying, because ideas have consequences. And if your ideas are not thought through well enough and are not dealt with um, and worked out well enough, you can come to some very dangerous interpretations that are very damning. And the history of the church and the history of religion and the history of the world is very clear on that. Ideas have consequences, like it or not. Every idea has some sort of consequence. Even take the idea of my AirPods here. These AirPods, I'm sure, were created, you would hope, for bringing good into the world. And these AirPods can bring good into the world. What unique goodness do AirPods bring into the world? Well, they give you the ability that regular headphones and regular earbuds do to be able to listen to audio and to be able to speak, and for it to be able to record that. Different that AirPods bring is that they deal with work without any cords, which is very helpful for the world in some sense. You don't have to worry about your cord tangling up. And I would have plenty of times where I'd have my earbuds sticking out of my sweater, because I would stuff the cord through my shirt and bring it out that way, right? That way, if my earbud fell off, it would still hang and not fall off my body or get tangled on something. But you can't necessarily always predict all of the problems that might come with new technology. With this new tech, you have the potential problem of being able to lose the earbud, right? And if the earbud falls off, it doesn't stay on your body. You can walk out and the earbud falls onto the ground and it's lost forever. You don't have a cord to hold it and tether it to yourself. And so, with every advancement in technology, or I would even argue advancement in thought, there comes new consequences and new problems to deal with that we cannot always predict and know how to deal with. So I have a phone. This phone gives me the ability to communicate with people on the other side of the world. It's an amazing ability and an amazing benefit. But because everyone has phones now, I can also, in public, just look like this and totally ignore people that are in front of me. So with this new technology, with this new idea, it's brought good to the world in that I can communicate with my loved ones halfway around the world and people I love who I don't get to see often. But it comes with a newfound problem, which is it takes away my focus from the real world, the people in front of me here and now. And it's more than just the media and the things that are brought with the phone. The phone itself changes the wiring of my focus and of my mind. Books do the same thing, right? When a pre-book world required a greater capacity for memorization. But once you could write things down into a book, you no longer have to memorize everything that you hear. There becomes a greater capacity in the sense that you can maintain more knowledge through the forms of books, and you don't have to work your mind as hard. But also, because I have the ability to write things down or come back to them later in the form of a book, I no longer have to have my mind no longer has to be able to memorize as much as it potentially could have. And so the world that we are in, um, and my abilities change based on the new technology and the new ideas that are brought forth into the world. As new ideas come into the world, they come with benefits, but they also come with sometimes unforeseen consequence that we couldn't have gathered. And then you bring time into the picture. Some things might present themselves as being very beneficial here and now. But 10 years later, and only after 10 years, do you start to see the problems with that. So, as soon as you introduce time as a factor as well, you might see that this thing directly brings this consequence, which we judge to be good. But we didn't see that this could be bad until this much time later, or vice versa. Maybe we judge something to be bad and harmful, and only later do we realize, oh, wait a minute, we were misunderstood on this, and this is actually good. But with time, we were able to discover that. And so, as soon as you bring time into the mixture, you also find that consequences that you think are good could have been bad, and things that you think were bad could have actually been good. And now, if you are someone who is producing thoughts into the world and giving your thoughts out into the world, there becomes the potential for great good, which is what greatly drives me. I see ideas that in my head and in my life might produce much good, but long down the road, they produce detrimental effects. And I have no way of knowing here and now. I can only predict so far. And what happens if the idea that I'm presenting to the world, which I'm so sure is bringing good to the world, is actually bringing harm to the world? That to me is terrifying. What if I become some very impactful or influential person in my world, and it's actually harmful to everyone in my world? And how am I supposed to know that? There have already been times in my life where I've done something with the full intent that it is in a desire to glorify God and in a desire to love others, and yet it brings effects on the world and on other people that I didn't foresee, or that completely uproot and destroy people. And you're just left there like, man, how did I was trying to bring good into the world, but even though my intention was right in this action, it didn't produce an effect that I desire, and it produced an effect that is, I would judge, harmful. Maybe time will tell, and it's actually a good effect, but in the moment, it seems harmful. And being that we're not infinite knowledgeable and we're not omniscient, it becomes something just terrifying, because I don't know what my ideas and what my influence is doing to the world. I don't know how my own voice is changing the world for better or for worse. And because I have such a desire to produce a better world, um, I'm hoping that is enough. I'm hoping that my own intention to bring good in the world is enough for God to use. And I'm hoping that my studying of the scriptures and my studying in my classes and my studying of many books and ideas is to bring benefit to the world. I'm hoping that everything I'm doing to garnish more knowledge and to sharpen myself as an individual, God will use for ultimate good. But I don't know that. I don't know if I can be certain or even sure enough that that is the case, because there's already been instances in my life where I thought I was doing something good through this particular action, and from what I judged of the situation, it actually brought harm. So with that experience, with those experiences, I'm very fearful and terrified of the type of influence I can have. And for that reason, and part of that fear, I think, is part of who I am, and maybe someone listening to this would think to themselves that my thoughts are way too extreme and that I'm overly concerned with this issue, and would say to themselves, well, we need to dismiss that fear, and we need to deal with that fear because it's not helpful and it's actually hindering me. But maybe my own fear here is part of my strength and part of what given me placed in me, because I can say, uh, because I have such a great fear of bringing harmful ideas and thoughts into the world. Because of that, I spend so much time studying, and I've become addicted to learning. I don't skip readings in my classes. I really try to extract as much as I can out of my teachers and out of the books I try to read, and even movies I watch, and even music I listen to. With everything that I'm thinking, I'm always trying to critique and judge and understand better the world around me. In part because I'm very curious, but also because I recognize that regardless of where I am in the world, I am influential. And I don't just mean I'm influential because of my personality or whatnot, but I mean, in one sense, wherever you are in the world, you are influencing that world. You just are. You're influencing it through your silence and through your voice, all the same. And I would say, uh, wherever I'm at in the world, I'm influencing it. And so the ideas I think through and the life that I live, for better or for worse, matters. I'm not a nihilist. I don't believe that life has no meaning and that there's no value in life and that there's no purpose in life. I do believe that there's meaning in life, but that doesn't necessarily bring me hope. In some sense, it's even more terrifying because if there's meaning to the world and meaning to life, then everything I do matters. Everything I do, in a sense, is influential. Even the things you do in secret are influential. You do something enough in quiet and in solitude where no one is watching, it still shapes your character and it still shapes your thought for when you are in the world. And so the things you do in quiet, the things you do in silence, the things you do in darkness, as even the scriptures would say, will be brought to light and they will shine whether you like it or not. Are you the type of person that you would want others to become? Are your thoughts and ideas that are harmful or beneficial to the world and those you love? Is your character something that others should emulate, should imitate, should display in themselves? And I think my fear of being harmful to the world drives me to hopefully to better myself. And so maybe in a sense, my fear of teaching could produce in me a better teacher than if I didn't have that fear. But in another sense, uh, I'm always very anxious anytime I get the opportunity to teach, as I have recently. More recently, I've been given the opportunity to preach at a few different churches. My own church is now my own pastors are allowing me to teach a discipleship class on Sunday mornings before our services, and I have a lot of fun doing it, and I have a lot of fun preparing for it. But I'm terrified of it, and no matter what I think about this issue, I cannot seem to shake that that fear that I have, and I cannot seem to shake that hurdle that has grown and developed within me. for better or for worse. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to process myself and whether I will even feel satisfied with what I know by the time I'm done with my degree, which I know that I won't. I know as soon as you're done learning one thing, there will always be more to learn. And even if you think you've exhausted your knowledge on one particular subject, you'll realize that by learning some random other subject, it will somehow bring insight to the insight the subject you're studying. My knowledge of hip hop and rap brings me insight into my philosophy and my interpretation of the Psalms. How could I have known that studying uh, Kendrick Lamar's albums would bring me insight into reading my Bible? How could I have foreseen that, right? And those perspectives cannot be, um, though that further knowledge cannot be foreseen in every circumstance to bring greater insight into the things you're learning. And so in a sense there's never an end to learning even on the subjects you think you know all about. There is no end of it. And may God guide guide our learning, and may he use the uh weak tools that we are for his own glory. And may that be our prayer for our own lives and for my own. Think about it.